Look, I'm going to be straight with you right from the start. Most preppers think they're ready for whatever's coming. They've got their gear, they've got their guns, and they think they've got the right mindset. But here's the hard truth that nobody wants to hear. If your plan is to be the hero, the vigilante, or the lone wolf commando when things go sideways, you're not prepping, you're just playing dress up. This isn't a movie where the music swells and the good guy always wins. Real collapse isn't fast and exciting like Hollywood shows us. It's slow, it's ugly, and it's exhausting in ways that'll break you down if you're not thinking straight. The Rambo fantasy that seems so cool and empowering right now could be the exact mindset that gets you and everyone around you hurt, isolated, or worse, when real trouble comes knocking. So if you're serious about actually surviving what's coming instead of just fantasizing about it, hit that subscribe button right now because we're about to tear apart one of the most dangerous myths in the prepping community. And while you're here, make sure you check out my new book, Before It All Falls Apart, the Emergency Prep Manual for the Real World, which you can grab on Amazon with the link down in the description. This book cuts through all the fantasy nonsense and gives you the real-world strategies you actually need. The first thing we need to understand is how deep this Hollywood programming really goes, and it's way worse than most people realize. The Rambo mindset isn't just about wanting to be tough, it's this whole belief system that survival equals domination, that you can outfight and outshoot, and out-alpha the entire world around you when everything falls apart. You see it everywhere in the prepping community. Guys who think having the most guns and the most tactical gear somehow makes them invincible. And it's reinforced constantly by action movies where the hero never gets tired, never makes mistakes, and never has to deal with the boring, exhausting, terrifying reality of actual survival. These movies cut out all the downtime, all the hunger and cold and fear and uncertainty that make up 90% of any real crisis situation. They don't show you the guy who's been eating one meal a day for 3 weeks and can barely think straight, or the woman who hasn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in a month because she's constantly watching for threats. Hollywood gives us this fantasy where bad guys always miss their shots, and the hero always knows exactly what to do, but in the real world, everyone's operating with incomplete information, everyone's making mistakes, and the person who looks the most confident is often the one who's about to make the biggest error in judgment. The tactical YouTubers playing dress up in their backyard and the Instagram prepper pages that make everything look like a video game are just feeding the same dangerous illusion. The whole fantasy is built on this idea that when society breaks down, somehow you'll be exempt from the chaos and confusion that affects everyone else. That you'll magically have perfect information and unlimited energy and resources while everyone around you is stumbling around in the dark. It ignores basic human psychology, the way stress and fear and exhaustion affect decision-making, the way even the most prepared people make stupid mistakes when they're operating under extreme pressure for extended periods of time. Now here's where this fantasy mindset gets really expensive and really dangerous. Because people caught up in the Rambo mentality think they can buy their way to survival instead of actually learning how to survive. I see it all the time. Guys who've spent $50,000 on weapons and tactical gear but can't purify water without a fancy filter, can't grow food, can't treat a serious injury and have maybe 3 days worth of actual food stored in their house. They've got 10 different rifles and 0 communication equipment, a garage full of ammunition, and no plan for basic sanitation when the toilets stop flushing. It's like they're collecting props for a movie instead of preparing for a reality. And the worst part is that all this gear becomes a liability when they don't know how to use it properly under stress. Gear won't think for you, and in real emergency situations, people freeze up because they've relied so much on having the perfect tool for every job that they never learned how to improvise and adapt when things don't go according to plan. The truth is, improvised solutions and common sense will save your life way more often than the latest tactical gadget. Because when your fancy equipment breaks or gets lost or stolen, you need to be able to solve problems with whatever's available. This gear obsession also creates a massive security risk because you're advertising to everyone around you that you've got valuable stuff worth stealing, and you're so focused on the cool factor of your equipment that you forget the most important rule of real survival, which is staying invisible and unremarkable until you absolutely have to reveal what you're capable of. The other problem with gear addiction is that it gives you false confidence, making you think you're prepared when you're actually just well equipped. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Having the best gear in the world won't help you if you don't understand basic principles like noise discipline, light discipline, and operational security. It won't help you if you can't make hard decisions about resource allocation, or if you panic the first time someone gets seriously hurt, and you have to choose between using your medical supplies on them or saving them for your own family. The dangers of this mindset go way beyond just wasting money on the wrong gear, because when you're caught up in the fantasy of being the hero, you make yourself a target for everyone who's looking for trouble or resources, or just someone to blame for their problems. People remember the guy who acts like he's got all the guns and all the answers, and when things get really bad, those are the first houses that get hit by desperate people who figure you must have something worth taking. In a real collapse situation, being low profile and underestimated is what keeps you alive, not strutting around like you're auditioning for an action movie. But the Rambo mindset also pushes people toward isolation. This whole idea that real men don't need help from anyone else. And that's probably the deadliest mistake you can make, because when you're truly alone, you've got no one watching your back while you sleep. No backup when a situation goes bad. No way to divide up the exhausting work of maintaining security and finding food and water and fuel. You're trying to do everything yourself, which means you're burning through your energy and your calories and your mental focus way faster than you should be. And you're making decisions without anyone there to tell you when you're being stupid or taking unnecessary risks. The ego that comes with this mindset also makes it impossible to work with other people effectively, because real leadership in a crisis means staying calm and admitting when you're wrong, and knowing when to shut up and listen to someone who might know more than you do about a particular situation. But when you're caught up in the fantasy of being the hero, you resist collaboration. You waste your strength trying to prove how capable you are, instead of conserving your resources for when they actually matter. And you end up underestimating threats because you assume everyone's going to be scared of you. The truth is, criminals and desperate people specifically look for overconfident targets because they know these people are more likely to do something predictable and stupid, like trying to fight back in a situation where compliance or escape would be smarter. When you're broadcasting strength and aggression, you're also signaling to potential threats that taking you down would be a significant victory, that you're probably worth the extra effort and risk. This mindset also makes you more likely to escalate situations that could be resolved peacefully, because you're constantly looking for opportunities to prove how tough you are, instead of looking for ways to de-escalate and avoid conflict altogether. You know, what's even worse than putting yourself at risk is how this mindset puts everyone around you in danger, because people who are caught up in playing the hero don't just make bad decisions for themselves, they drag their whole family and community down with them. These are the guys who escalate every situation instead of de-escalating, who just can't resist the urge to prove how tough they are, even when the smart move is to back down and walk away. They attract attention to their group. They ruin operational security by running their mouth about their preparations and capabilities, and they assume they should be in charge just because they've got the biggest gun collection or the loudest voice. One person who can't control their ego can get an entire group seen by the wrong people, blamed for things they didn't do, or rated by authorities or criminals who wouldn't have noticed them otherwise. They refuse to follow anyone else's lead, even when that person has more experience or better judgment. They break discipline and compromise group security because they think the rules don't apply to them. And they create tension and conflict within the group when unity and cooperation are literally matters of life and death. I've seen families torn apart because dad decided he was going to be the warlord of the neighborhood and ended up alienating all the neighbors who could have been valuable allies in a crisis. These people also tend to teach their families the wrong priorities, focusing on combat skills and weapon handling instead of the practical knowledge that actually keeps people alive day after day in a long-term survival situation. They create a culture of paranoia and aggression in their household that makes their kids scared and their spouse resentful, and they often refuse to teach other family members essential skills because they want to maintain their position as the indispensable protector. When something happens to them, and statistically something will happen because they're taking unnecessary risks all the time, they leave their family completely unprepared to handle basic survival tasks because everything was supposed to revolve around their leadership and their expertise. They're the ones who start arguments at community meetings, who refuse to participate in neighborhood watch programs unless they can be in charge, who make threats instead of building relationships, and who generally burn bridges that their families might desperately need when things get bad. They also tend to attract other unstable personalities, creating little groups of wannabe warriors who feed off each other's fantasies and become increasingly divorced from reality. These groups often fall apart when faced with real challenges because they're built around ego and competition instead of mutual support and practical cooperation. And when they collapse, they often do it in spectacular ways that put everyone around them at risk. So here's something that might surprise you if you've never worked with actual military or law enforcement professionals. But the people who really know what they're doing, the special forces guys and the SWAT teams and the experienced combat veterans, they don't act anything like the Rambo fantasy that's so popular in prepper culture. Real operators understand that bravado and intimidation tactics are the mark of an amateur, because professionals are focused on completing the mission and getting everyone home alive, not on looking cool or proving how tough they are. They move quietly, they work as a team, they follow established protocols even when it's boring or seems unnecessary, and they avoid unnecessary confrontations because every fight you don't have to have is a win in their book. No real professional is trying to look tough or intimidating. They're trying to be invisible until the moment they need to act, and then they want to end the situation as quickly and efficiently as possible with minimal risk to themselves and their team. They spend way more time on planning and preparation and training than they do on actually fighting, because they understand that the real work happens before the shooting starts, in the intelligence gathering and the route planning and the contingency preparation that most wannabe commandos find too boring to bother with. Real operators also understand the value of mundane skills like navigation and communication and medical training, because they know that in a real crisis, you're way more likely to die from getting lost or injured or sick than you are from a dramatic gunfight with bad guys. They cross-train in multiple specialties, so the team doesn't fall apart if one person goes down. They practice working with limited resources and broken equipment, and they're constantly learning from their mistakes instead of pretending they never make any. Most importantly, real professionals understand that leadership isn't about being the loudest or the most aggressive person in the room. It's about making good decisions under pressure and taking care of the people who are counting on you to get them through the crisis safely. They also understand the importance of what they call the OODA loop, which stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And they know that the observation and orientation phases are way more important than the action phase, because if you're reading the situation wrong, all the tactical skill in the world won't save you. They're constantly asking themselves what could go wrong, what they might be missing, what assumptions they might be making that could get them in trouble. They're also extremely disciplined about following established procedures and protocols, even when it seems unnecessary, because they understand that discipline and consistency are what keep teams alive when everything goes chaotic and people start making emotional decisions based on fear and adrenaline. One of the biggest problems with the Rambo fantasy is that it's based on this completely wrong idea of what collapse actually looks like, because most people are preparing for a dramatic, fast-moving crisis that plays out like an action movie, when the reality is that real collapse is slow and boring and exhausting in ways that will test your patience and your endurance way more than your shooting skills. The threats you're actually going to face during a long-term crisis are mostly logistical, not tactical things like your water source getting contaminated, your food spoiling, because you lost refrigeration people in your group having mental breakdowns from the stress and uncertainty, equipment failing when you can't get replacement parts, and injuries, or illnesses that turn into serious problems because you don't have access to proper medical care. Most of your time during a real collapse situation is going to be spent on routine maintenance tasks, managing resources, dealing with personality conflicts, and trying to maintain some kind of normal routine and morale when everything around you is falling apart slowly. The day-to-day reality of survival is about boredom management, about finding ways to stay busy and productive and mentally healthy when you're living with constant, low-level stress and uncertainty about the future. It's about preventing small problems from becoming big problems, about maintaining discipline and organization when it would be easy to just give up and let everything slide. Rambo types burn out fast in this kind of environment because they're constantly looking for dramatic conflict and heroic moments that just don't exist. in real long-term survival situations. They get frustrated with the routine work. They don't have the patience for the careful resource management and planning that keeps a group alive over months or years. And they often make impulsive decisions that waste precious supplies or put people at risk because they're bored and looking for action. The people who actually thrive in extended crisis situations are the ones who can find satisfaction in small victories, who can maintain their focus and discipline even when nothing exciting is happening, and who understand that survival is about endurance and adaptability, not about dramatic heroics. These aren't decisions you can solve with firepower or tough guy posturing. They require wisdom and judgment and the ability to think through complex situations where there are no clear right answers. The timeline of real collapse is also completely different from what most people expect, because instead of everything falling apart in a matter of days or weeks, you're looking at a process that unfolds over months or years, with periods of relative stability interrupted by sudden crises, rolling blackouts and shortages, and a gradual breakdown of services and infrastructure that leaves you constantly adapting to new challenges and limitations. The people who actually survive real disasters and long-term crises aren't the ones making the most noise or looking the most dangerous. They're the quiet ones who blend in and build relationships and carry their confidence without broadcasting it to everyone around them. Real survivalists understand that gray man tactics, just looking normal and unremarkable, will keep you safe way better than any amount of tactical gear or aggressive posturing. They focus on building strong community relationships because they know that having reliable allies is worth more than having the biggest gun collection. And they practice what I call silent strength, which is about discipline and calm preparation instead of bravado and showing off. The best prepared people I know are often the ones you'd never suspect, the ones who seem ordinary and maybe even a little boring, but who've actually thought through every aspect of what they'd need to do if things went bad. They understand that real tactical thinking involves movement and concealment and deception, figuring out how to avoid fights entirely instead of planning to win them through superior firepower. These are the people who've mapped out multiple escape routes from their neighborhood, who know which neighbors they can trust and which ones to avoid, who've quietly stockpiled supplies without drawing attention, and who've trained their families in basic security and communication without turning their home into an armed compound that screams, "We've got stuff worth stealing," to anyone driving by. They're constantly working on their observation and awareness skills, paying attention to patterns in their area, noting who's gathering in groups, watching for signs that trouble might be headed their way before it actually arrives. They think about resource management in practical terms, understanding that carrying all your gear and operating at reduced strength and nutrition levels is a lot harder than it looks in the movies. These people also understand the importance of what I call strategic depth, which means having multiple layers of security and fallback plans instead of putting all their eggs in one basket. They don't just have one bug-out location, they have several options depending on what kind of crisis they're facing and which routes are still passable. They don't just store food in one place, they have caches hidden in multiple locations so they can't lose everything if one site gets compromised. They think in terms of redundancy and backup systems for everything critical, from water purification to communication to transportation. They cultivate friendships with people who have different skill sets and resources. They participate in community organizations and volunteer activities that let them observe and network without drawing attention to their preparedness activities. And they're always looking for ways to be useful to others so that when they need help, people will remember their contributions and be willing to return the favor. If you really want to be prepared for what's coming, you need to focus on developing skills that actually work in the real world, instead of the fantasy skills that look cool in movies, but fall apart under pressure. The most important thing you can develop is situational awareness, the ability to spot when someone's watching your property or casing your neighborhood, to notice changes in local patterns and behaviors that might signal trouble coming your way. This means learning to read people, to tell when someone's lying or bluffing, or trying to bait you into reacting emotionally, instead of thinking clearly about your options. You need to get good at resource management in practical terms, understanding how much you can actually carry when you're tired and stressed, how to fix things when they break because they always break at the worst possible time, and how to operate effectively when you're running on one meal a day and getting maybe 4 hours of sleep. Communication skills are absolutely critical. And I'm not just talking about radios, I'm talking about hand signals and preset emergency codes and nonverbal ways to share information that keep your group coordinated without announcing your business to everyone within earshot. Discipline under pressure is something you can only develop through practice, learning to stay calm and think clearly when your adrenaline is pumping and everything seems to be going wrong at once. Because the person who panics and starts making emotional decisions becomes just as dangerous as any external threat. You need to understand controlled posture, knowing when to look capable and when to look harmless, how to project quiet confidence without seeming threatening, and how to de-escalate situations before they turn violent, because every fight you avoid is energy and resources and risk that you don't have to deal with. And speaking of my book, Before It All Falls Apart, the emergency prep manual for the real world, all of these skills and many more are covered in detail with practical exercises you can practice right now. So make sure you grab your copy from Amazon using the link in the description below. But beyond these basic skills, you also need to develop what I call operational thinking, which is the ability to plan and execute complex tasks under stress while managing limited resources and dealing with unexpected complications. This means learning to break big problems down into manageable steps, to prioritize tasks based on urgency and importance, to delegate responsibilities effectively, and to adapt your plans when circumstances change. You need to understand basic psychology and group dynamics because managing people under stress is one of the hardest parts of any survival situation, and you need to know how to keep morale up, resolve conflicts, and maintain discipline when everyone's scared and tired and hungry. Medical skills are absolutely essential, not just basic first aid, but more advanced trauma care, and the ability to treat infections and illnesses with limited resources. You need to understand basic mechanics and electronics so you can maintain and repair critical equipment, and you need to know how to improvise solutions when you don't have the right tools or parts. Most importantly, you need to develop judgment and decision-making skills, the ability to weigh risks and benefits quickly and accurately, to recognize when you're operating on incomplete information, and to make the best decision you can with what you know while remaining flexible enough to change course when new information becomes available. One of the biggest problems with the Rambo fantasy is that it completely ignores the psychological and emotional reality of what you're actually signing up for when you decide to be the tough guy who handles everything alone. The movies never show you the loneliness that eats away at you when you're constantly on guard, never able to truly relax or trust anyone else to share the burden of keeping everyone safe. They don't show you the sleep deprivation that clouds your judgment and makes you paranoid and irritable, or the decision fatigue that comes from being responsible for every choice that could mean life or death for you and your family. There's no soundtrack playing when you're lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering if that noise outside is just the wind or something you need to investigate, knowing that getting up means losing more precious sleep, but ignoring it could mean disaster. The emotional weight of making life and death decisions, especially when those decisions affect other people, is something that breaks down even the strongest individuals over time. And when you add in the regret and guilt that comes from the mistakes you'll inevitably make, the isolation of not having anyone to share that burden with becomes unbearable. Survivor's guilt is real and it's devastating, and it hits hardest when you set yourself up as the person who's supposed to have all the answers and keep everyone safe. The moral fog that surrounds every decision in a real crisis, where there are no clear good guys and bad guys and every choice involves trade-offs and compromises that would have seemed unthinkable in normal times, is something that the hero fantasy never accounts for. Most people who fail in long-term survival situations don't fail because they didn't have enough gear or ammunition. They fail because they couldn't handle the psychological weight of their own choices and expectations, because they isolated themselves trying to be stronger and more capable than any human being actually needs to be. The people who last, who really make it through extended crises, are the ones who understand that survival is a team sport, that sharing the burden of leadership and decision-making isn't weakness, it's the only way to maintain your sanity and judgment over the long haul. You start making mistakes because you're running on fumes, your immune system breaks down from stress and lack of sleep, and you become increasingly paranoid and unable to distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. The social isolation that comes from this mindset also cuts you off from one of the most important resources for psychological resilience, which is human connection and support. When you're trying to be the strong, silent type who doesn't need anyone, you're also cutting yourself off from the emotional processing and reality testing that comes from talking through your experiences and decisions with trusted friends and family members. This isolation can lead to depression, anxiety, and a gradual loss of perspective that makes you more vulnerable to poor decision-making and emotional breakdown just when you most need to be thinking clearly and maintaining your composure. Look, I get it. The Rambo fantasy is appealing because it makes us feel powerful and in control when everything around us seems to be falling apart. But if you're serious about actually protecting yourself and your family when things get bad, you need to let go of the Hollywood programming and start thinking like an actual survivor instead of an action hero. Forget about trying to look intimidating or proving how tough you are or planning to single-handedly take on whatever threats come your way. The people who actually make it through real disasters are the ones who stay hidden, stay smart, and keep their ego buried deeper than their emergency food supply. They understand that survival isn't about winning or looking cool. It's about staying alive and keeping the people you care about safe. And sometimes that means looking weak or boring or unremarkable to everyone around you. They know that the best fight is the one you never have to have, that the best defense is the one nobody sees coming, and that real strength comes from preparation and adaptability and the wisdom to know when to act and when to wait. If you're prepping to be some kind of post-apocalyptic warlord, you're setting yourself up for failure and putting everyone around you in danger. But if you're prepping to survive smart, to blend in when you need to build the relationships and skills that actually matter, and to avoid every unnecessary risk and confrontation, then you're on the right track and you're going to be way ahead of all the wannabe commandos when reality hits. Make sure you grab my book, Before It All Falls Apart, the emergency prep manual for the real world from Amazon, because it's packed with the real-world strategies and mindset shifts you need to survive what's coming without getting caught up in dangerous fantasies. If this video opened your eyes to some uncomfortable truths about prepping mindset, hit that like button, subscribe for more reality-based survival content, and share this with anyone in your prepper circle who might be falling into the Rambo trap. Drop a comment below and tell me about the worst prepper fantasy you've seen lately, because I guarantee you're not the only one who's noticed how far some people have drifted from practical preparation into pure fantasy. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember that the best survivors are the ones you never see coming.